Hello everybody and welcome back to another video on the SanteSuite YouTube channel. This video is going to be a little bit different. Rather than doing our typical tutorial video format or our architecture format, what we're going to do is we're going to go through a change video that's going to show all of the new features that are in our brand new version 2.2 release of SanteDB and more specifically SanteMPI. There's been a lot of changes since the beginning of 2021 where we had version 2.0 of SanteSuite. And all throughout 2021, we've released a series of community technology previews in the 2.1 version range, which is used to collect feedback and do testing on some of the new features. So if you've been installing and using version 2.1, some of these features may not be news to you. However, if you are one of the deployment partners that is still using version 1 of SanteDB with OpenIZ, or if you are using version 2.0 of SanteMPI or SanteDB, a lot of the user interface changes and APIs will be new for you. We're going to be demonstrating this on our community server where the freshly baked version 2.0 has been deployed, and we will be packaging up some installation tools and some Docker images and pushing those up to Docker Hub once we iron out some of the deployment and packaging for those particular releases. So without further ado, let's get to it, and we're going to start with the changes made to the Fire APIs. So let's get to it. Okay, so let's start with the new APIs. So if you've installed version 2.0 of SanteDB, this screen should look familiar. This is the Swagger documentation, which is generated by SanteDB. And this is a feature we've had since version 2.0. One of the things that I want to illustrate that are new features are support for, in Fire, for example, operations. So you'll see here bundle $validate. $validate is a new feature that we have in order to execute operations on the Fire server. For example, we also have patient match, we support IG picks, as well as other operations on resources. So I have here a SOAP UI, and if you watched any of our videos previously, you'll be very familiar with the MPI installation qualification tools. And those have the installation qualification data for the MPI running on a local system to make sure that you've actually installed the software correctly. And another thing that we have is we actually have all of these Swagger interfaces pre-populated in our SOAP UI project. So you can actually expand the HL7 fast health interoperability resources. And this list, because it's the SanteMPI test case list, has been reduced from the global list of all Fire resources into only those that the MPI is concerned with. And you can see here we've got some of our new operations listed on patient. So what I'm going to do is we're going to actually open up a GET request. And the way that you run the installation qualification tool against a server that's not localhost is on the endpoint. You're going to have to click on the endpoint, click on Edit Current, and you're going to change the localhost endpoint to be the endpoint of the server that you're sending these Fire messages against. And in this case, we're sending them against the demo MPI instance. So I'm just going to press OK. The next thing you're going to have to do is you're going to have to get an OAuth token. SanteDB uses OpenID Connect, and we're just using here a client credentials grant. And you'll see here that I need to change my access token URI as well. So I'm going to change that to HTTPS. And we're going to load demo mpi.santesuite.net on port 8443. and I'm going to call get access token, and you'll see now my access token has changed. If I go ahead and run this, and I have a JSON object, we can see that we have a few enhancements to the Fire interface that are different than the version 2.0 Fire interface resources that you'll get back. The first thing is that they are all now in Fire R4. Previously on version 2.0, all of our resources were using Fire R3. So we've gone ahead and we've updated them all to use Fire R4. The next thing we've done is we have also changed the way in which extensions are handled. So in 2.0, only data which was tagged as an act extension or an entity extension would appear in the extension handler. However, any patient now that has a mother would have a special extension handler. And we'll include a link to the wiki on how you can write your own custom Fire extensions. But basically, you can now expose whatever data you want in a Fire message from the CDR by implementing a customized extension handler. And we've done this for things like nationality, citizenship, mother's maiden name to support IHEPDQM, etc. The other thing that we've done is we've actually supported now the linking to and from master records. So, for example, you can see here in my link, I've now got a link for the patient that's being represented, but you can see I have these see also links. And the see also links tell me that this particular record has two local records that I can consult with if I want to see what the source records for this particular record look like. And I'm just going to go ahead and copy out an identifier here. And we're going to go to my get patient by ID. And if I paste in my ID of this local patient and get a fresh token. Oh, apologies. We have to edit the host as well for each test case. So we'll go SanteMPI.SanteSuite.net on 8443. There we go. And now we'll see information about this particular local record with a reference link back to the master record. So if I were to compare the master record here, we can see it's got some extra metadata. So, it's saying here that it has a record of truth, which means that this particular record has been tagged as being valid and updated by a user. We've got, the MBM type is a master. Whereas if I were to go to this local here, you'd see that none of those tags exist on that local. The other thing that we've implemented that's relatively new is the IHE PixM functionality. So I'm just going to go ahead and grab this MRN here, and I want to ask the system to do a Pix cross-reference. So to do that, we can execute the IHE Pix. And I provide a source identifier. In Fire format, and I believe it's test.com/mrn. Yep. I also want to edit the endpoint to SanteSuite.net on 8443. And I want to add authorization. I want to use my OAuth token for SanteDB. And when I run this here, you'll see that we now have a parameters returned with a cross-reference request response. And this is useful if you want to use IHE PixM rather than the Pix version, Pix for HL7 version 2, which is supported in just the HL7 version 2 interface. And again, this is a new feature that we have for SanteDB version 2.2. The other thing that we've implemented is the fire match operation. And what the fire match operation allows us to do is to quickly send the fire service on SanteDB a patient, and we can have the MPI or the matching engine in SanteDB, if it's configured for other use cases, to actually to match potential duplicates. And I've actually gone ahead and created a sample request for Jane Doe, who's a female, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to run this. Okay, yep, we'll get a response after some processing, where we can see that these are the candidates which were detected for Jane Doe. And I can see that there are 110 total candidates which kind of matched the blocking. In SanteDB, anything more than 100 records in the block aren't loaded. There's only 100 records loaded, and then anything that's currently left in memory from the loading is fed into the matching. So there is a hard limit on blocks that can be considered. But we can see here that we have different patient records. And I can see here, for example, there's a John Doe with a female gender, so it's probably erroneous data. But because my match configuration has SoundX, a SoundX matching, it was considered a record. And those are some of the highlights of the new Fire interface elements that we've supported in version 2.2. We also support Fire messaging via bundles, and that's how the PMIR messages are implemented. It's a little bit more in depth to go into PMIR and how those messages are constructed and sent to the Fire server, or rather the SanteDB Fire endpoint. However, we're not going to cover those here because this is just a version overview. So let's get on to the user interface enhancements. And I think this is where a lot of the new features are going to be used more by end users, perhaps like yourself, more so than integrators or developers. So let's take a look at how the user interface has been updated. First, on the user interface, under the System menu, we have the Probes interface. The Probes interface allows users to see how the different systems in their SanteDB deployment are behaving. In this view, I'm currently looking at the local service, which from the administrative portal is the perspective of the Web Access Gateway, or the DCDR. I can see the busyness of the .NET thread pool, the built-in SanteDB thread pool, which is where background tasks get queued, rather long-running background tasks get queued. We can see our CPU usage if we're running the server on Windows, and we can also see how many HTTP clients are connecting, as well as how many are allocated for listening. And this number grows as the system gets more and more busy, or rather as the user interface gets more busy. If I want to take a look at the Realm service or the central CDR, we can also take a look at that. You'll see we have very similar statistics for our Realm service, including the HTTP workers, our machine metrics, and we can also see that we have metrics about our database connections. This is important if you're going to be doing things like diagnosing why a particular query is taking a long time, or if you notice your database access is really slow, you can see the number of read-only connections and the average execution time of responses to and from your database. Next is the jobs interface. In 2.0, we had the jobs interface. However, it wasn't very flexible. You could only really run jobs, and you could see what the job was doing. What we've done is we've actually enhanced this so we can actually edit the schedule of each job. Now we can actually specify if we want a job to run on a calendar schedule, and if it runs on a calendar schedule, we can select when we would like this particular job to start. So I'm going to start this job today. I'm going to run it at 12 a.m. and every day of the week. And if I save this, you can see that I can see the modified schedule. Additionally, we have added the ability for scheduled jobs to accept parameters. So if I were to run this interactively and I just wanted to update a single BI view, I could go ahead and type in the name of the view. If I have a module that just needs one view refreshed, I can go ahead and run that job on a single view. Additionally, I can also see now the progress of a task. We've added this so long-running jobs can actually report back to the user and the administrator how that job is performing. Additionally, we have added the ability to cancel long-running jobs that support it. And the cancellation really just sends a request to cancel the job to the backend system, and whenever the job is able to cancel itself, it will go ahead and cancel itself. Next, we have the PubSub Manager. In SanteDB 2.0, the PubSub capabilities were very limited. Part of what we've done in the SanteDB 2.2 work through 2021 is we've actually added the ability in Fire to subscribe to particular events in the server. I can also, in the administrative panel, enable or disable those subscriptions based on whether or not they're active or if I want to only turn them on for a limited amount of time. I can also edit any subscription that has been created by a client system, regardless if it were created in the user interface or by Fire. I can look at the type of resource that is being published, and I can select the events that I'd like to subscribe to for this particular patient. You can also set things like where do we want to send the message, the time constraints when I would like this message sent, as well as set custom HTTP headers and authentication on the system that on the request that I'm sending out to the system. Next is the dispatcher queue. In SanteDB 2.0, what would happen when a process would want to send a particular piece of data to an external system is it would queue a thread on the thread pool. While this works for low volume environments, there do become times where you actually need to manage threads more intelligently. In order to facilitate this change, what we've done is we've added a dispatcher queue. A dispatcher queue is a persistent queue where any messages that are bound for an outbound system, in this case on the local service, any messages that are bound for the administrative management interface are instead queued to disk, where when that machine becomes available, the background task on a single thread can, on demand, send these messages. It also allows us to do things like capture, and you can see here, a dead letter queue. And the dead letter queue is used when we have messages that couldn't be delivered. And I can see here that I have 95 in the active queue and 1 in the dead letter queue. And I'm just going to resubmit these, and you can see that the system is slowly dequeuing these and sending them off to the administrative management interface. I can also take a look at the queues on the production server. Currently, as of time of recording, the only queuing technology that we support on Docker is a local file system based queue, which is good for development and getting started with SanteDB and smaller deployments. On Windows, you have the option of using Microsoft message queues, and that's what the community server is using, and you can tell that by the format of the queue path. There's also a piece of work being done by one of our community partners to implement RabbitMQ queuing. And that will allow Windows, Docker, or Linux machines to use a more fast and reliable queue that isn't based on the file system. And it also allows for more scalability since you can have multiple systems all using the same RabbitMQ instance. The next series of enhancements are to the Security Center. In version 2.0, all of the Security Center pages were statically coded so that they could edit only a user or only a device or only an application, and there was no real way to extend these. Part of our initiative in doing the user interface update is to make these components more extensible. So if you're familiar with the idea of the SanteDB plugin applets, you'll know how the tabs and panel widgets can be exposed in order to allow for extension of a particular core user interface screen, and that's what we're seeing here. Each of these tabs provides a panel area where plugins can add pieces of information to this particular user's screen in the administrative panel. This is shown by SanteGuard. When SanteGuard is installed on the user panel, there is a user activity panel which shows the activity that this user has been performing, and also how this particular object has been accessed. So SanteGuard is an example of this extensibility, which is now in version 2.2. This applies to all of our security panels. So for example, groups also have a audit trail because the SanteGuard plugin again has extended this particular panel to include new tabs. The next enhancement that was performed was a refactoring of the audit repository. Prior, the audit repository only allowed for a very limited view of what audits were in the system. What we've done is we've expanded this in order to give the administrator more insight into what's occurring on their system. For example, I could see if there were any serious problems with the community server by simply filtering any events by major failure. I can further limit the event to show any authentication event which has been a failure. Previously, when you would click View, you would be shown a limited pop-up. This has also been updated in SanteDB 2.2. The new user interface for audit details show more information about the source process, about the machines that are involved, the remote IP addresses, as well as extra information about the particulars of the data that was edited. We can also take a look at specific users in the system simply by filtering out their particular username and seeing what it is that they are up to. The next major enhancement in the SanteDB 2.2.0 branch relates more to the SanteMPI plugin. In version 2.0, the match dashboard was very limited, and we really only did matching by API. Now we can see in the matching panel that we have a very robust user interface for seeing a summary of all of the matches in our system, as well as statistics about when matches were detected, how many duplications per record we're getting, as well as the classifications of matches. Another thing I can do is I can actually download reports about my linkages in my system. This is subject to the maximum row limit, which by default is 10,000 rows in an Excel spreadsheet. However, this can be changed in the SanteDB config file. I don't have Excel on this particular machine, so I can't actually show what the contents of this file are, but they are an Excel spreadsheet that you can open if you have Excel. Part of the enhancement for the match dashboard that we've performed is that of being able to quick resolve or quick ignore records. On the community server, we disable auto-linking, so you'll see these confidences of 100%. This is simply indicating that a duplicate was detected. The match configuration determines that it is in fact a 100% match according to configuration. It's just that linking has not been enabled, or automatic linking has not been enabled. I can, as an administrator, resolve this by simply clicking the Resolve button and pressing OK. And the next series of matches will be shown. And I can repeat this for... What I can also do from the match dashboard is I can see matches that aren't quite detected as perfect matches. I can open the match pair by clicking on View. In this new interface, we see a side-by-side comparison of both records that were in the consideration for being a match. I see my person A, which is the source record, which came from a source system, and I see my record B, which is a master record, or a record which has been managed by MDM. We can also do a full A-B compare, which has all the information for the patients. Finally, I can click on the Scoring tab and see how it is that the system came up with this score. And I can take a look at these particular record datas in the A and B value, and we can see why it is that this record is considered a match. I'm going to scroll down and I'm going to ignore this particular record just because I want to demonstrate the ignore functionality. Once I ignore it, I can see that I am taken back to my dashboard for matches to continue my process of matching. If I click back after resolving a match, I can see that this particular match has been resolved. And I want to illustrate how we've improved the user interface for patient details. So I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to open up person B. There have been a lot of enhancements that we've made to the patient details screen. If I click on the Master Data Management tab, we can see that there is now a new way of looking at the master data links in a particular record. For example, I can see that this particular record has a candidate record. It has two links. One was generated by the system, and one was automatically created by the matching engine. I can also see that ignore candidate record that I had previously instructed the system to ignore by performing an ignore. I can unignore this record by clicking unignore, and you'll see that that particular candidate is now reconsidered for a candidate. I can instruct the system to do a rematch. This is useful if you would like to apply or test a change to a match configuration. I can instruct the system to perform a complete rematch using the data in the database. For each of these records, I can perform an operation to see what the details of this match are. And as you can tell, this is identical to the Scoring tab on our match pair resolution screen. I can resolve this link by clicking on the Resolve button and pressing OK. What we see is we now have a link between the record that I just accepted and this master record, and it is a verified. I can also, if I choose, perform an ignore operation. An ignore operation will move a record from a candidate into an ignore statement. If I refresh this page and take a look at the updated entity relationships, we will now see that we have a single master record with 3 links to local records. Another enhancement that we've done is to ensure that source records are not edited so that they disagree with the system that sent them. This is important as we don't want the SanteDB central system to have a source record attributed to a particular system which has been modified by a human. Instead, we can instruct the browser to go to the master that is linked to that particular record. We've also done several enhancements around the controlling of state. What I might do is after merging this patient, I might say that this patient is not new, i.e. not reviewed, but they are active. I can then edit this patient's profile, and I can click on the name, and here I can see that Zarek Bill Aaron and Zarek Aaron. I'm going to switch this over to be a pseudonym for him. I can also validate his official address with official records. For example, if I determine he does not in fact live at this particular address, I can remove it. Finally, we've added several panels which allow you to capture extended data. We can capture Zarek's occupation, his VIP status, his education level, his living arrangement, marital status, and depending on the configuration and requirements of your environment, we can also capture things such as religion and ethnicity. However, by default, these are disabled. Additionally, I can establish a citizenship. Finally, pressing OK, and I will now have a patient record which has been updated with the information I've provided. And if I refresh this page, we will see that we are now looking at a master which has a record of truth. In the future, when I want to edit this record of truth, I should do so on the record of truth rather than on the master. However, I can also override this decision and tell the system that I want to edit the master anyways. Remember, in SanteDB, in the MDM layer, the master record does not contain any information. It is merely an anchor for other records to point to. Another enhancement that's been performed is to the entity relationship graph. We can see in the previous version of SanteDB this particular entity relationship graph. However, it was not clear which records were responsible for which relationships on a master. Here, I'm looking at the simple view of the relationship graph. I can see that the master here has 3 records pointing at it to be master records, and 1 single ignore record. I can also see that there is a record of truth attached to this particular master, and this master is considered a citizen of the United States. If I wanted to see which local records are responsible for this particular relationship of citizen and ignore record, I can now click on Advanced Graph. And the Advanced Graph will show which concrete links are between records and how the master record is inferred as a relationship. So for example, the record of truth for Zarek is a citizen of the United States, and by that virtue, the master record can be inferred as a citizen of the United States. The next set of enhancements that we've performed in SanteDB are around searching. Previously, the search in SanteMPI was an identifier search, so I could only search by identifier. This has been updated to be a free text search or a full text search. So if I search for John Doe, I can actually search for anybody named John Doe or anybody who has an alias of John Doe. I can also perform basic operations such as I don't want people, and I can prefix that with a not, who have a name of Abbott, and you'll see that that record of Abbott has disappeared. I can do this on identifiers, on telecommunications addresses, and on identifiers. So for example, I see here I have 5,298 results. I can also exclude people who live in the Bronx, and that will reduce my results set by adding more and more search terms. Another thing that we've done is we've actually enhanced the search screen to allow users to perform a discrete search. Using a discrete search allows me as an administrator to search for patients who have discrete fields. For example, if I wanted to search for John Doe and people who live in the Bronx, I could instead search on people named John Doe who live in the Bronx. And the power search function allows a power user or a data analyst to execute a search based on any field that is stored inside of SanteDB. For example, I might wish to search for, let's say, patients with a gender concept of female. I can also add a search term, and we'll say we want the gender concept of female, and we want to have all people who have a relationship in that they are a citizen, and the target is a place with an identifier matching Canada. And what this search will do is this search is going to search for all females who are a citizen, or rather flagged as a citizen of Canada. Additionally, we have added the ability of system administrators and policy administrators to restrict searching or disclosure on particular fields. You may remember that I had mentioned that we can capture religion and ethnicity. On the community server, religion is a restricted field. What this means is anytime a plugin or client or extension attempts to use religion, we will get an error. So for example, if I wanted to provide or perform the not so nice query of finding all Buddhists who are female in Canada, and I press the search button, what we will see is we have actually had a violation, a privacy violation. And this is part of the policy enforcement layer in SanteDB and SanteMPI that have been enabled in version 2.2.0. Finally, one of the most exciting features for SanteMPI users is the ability to create and edit match configurations in the user interface. The new screen for configuration allows me to see which match configurations on this particular server are enabled, which one are inactive, and it allows me to enable or disable match configurations from the user interface. Previously in version 2.0 of SanteDB and SanteMPI, this was managed completely using source configuration files on the server. I can also download a reported copy of the match configuration so that I can actually print these off and share it as part of my documentation. If I click on a particular match configuration, one of the enhancements made was around displaying the different stages of match configuration in SanteDB and also displaying them graphically. For example, I can see that this match configuration is going to pull from patient. It will match on identifier, or rather block on identifier social security number, or perform a block on these fuzzy fields before sending that through the scoring stage, and finally the classification stage. I can also edit the configuration file within the user interface. For example, if I were using the Hello World plugin, or if I had written a Hello World program, I might add a tag for Hello World to a match configuration, which would then be used by that plugin in some way which suits it. I can also, on the blocking tab, view the details about how records which are using this configuration will be loaded from the database based on inputs. I also see a detailed view of the block configuration. I can now also edit these block configurations, and I can also define custom rules. So for example, if I wanted to add a rule, I could say that I want to union these particular records and I want to match on, say, MRN, and you can see that the system is going to fire of MRN value. And I can see that the system has helped me type in these particular configuration statements. And I'm just going to also do a block here to say that I only want to execute this particular statement when the patient has an MRN, or the input patient has an MRN. We've also included help on every single input on the new user interface screens, so users can now hover over the particular field and see how it is that that field applies to the screen that they're looking at. And when I hit save, you will see that we now update the blocking configuration diagram to now say it's been blocking on SSN or MRN or the fuzzy fields. Additionally, I can click on the Scoring tab and I can get a detailed view of how each attribute in the match configuration is going to be scored. For example, I can see that this particular match configuration is matching on date of birth, or scoring rather, on date of birth, gender concept, address, name, social security number, and telecom. I can expand any one of these particular configurations and get a detailed view of how that particular score is going to be calculated. I can see here that we're going to extract the address field. We are going to then extract the city from the address field. We're going to perform a Jarrow-Winkler string difference. And if that is greater than 0.8, we're going to take 3.2 and multiply it by the similarity function. If they don't match, we're going to apply a score of -1.7. And if the address is null, we're not going to score this attribute. I can edit these scoring rules by clicking on the pencil icon and changing the logic for scoring. For example, currently, if the address is not present, then we're not going to evaluate this particular field. What that means is we might have records that are very high candidate matches, but missing key pieces of information. Address is probably a bad example, so let's do date of birth. Currently, if we do not have a date of birth, we are not going to score date of birth. But we might say in our context, we must have a date of birth to get a reliable match. So instead of an ignore statement, I'm going to use a disqualify statement, meaning that if we do not have a date of birth, I want to disqualify this record. And I'm going to press the save button, and you'll see that my configuration has been updated. Next is the classification screen. The classification tab allows us to change how records are classified. Currently, I can see that this configuration is using a normalized score, but I could switch that to an absolute score. Absolute scores are more useful if you're not going to ignore fields that are missing. Rather, you just want to score them as 0 or a negative number. Normalized matches are a new form of matching in the actual SanteMPI matching engine, which have been added in version 2.2. This allows administrators to set thresholds based on a score of the total evaluated attributes. So rather than setting an absolute threshold of, say, 5 points for a probable match, I can actually set a range of 0 to 0.7, which is expressed here as a percentage. Or I can say my threshold is lower, and I want to say from 0 to 55% of attributes scored is a non-match, 55 to 0.9 or 0.55 to 0.9 are a probable match, and anything above a 0.9 would be a match. And I'm going to go ahead and save that. Finally, what I can do is I can go ahead and I can test my match configuration. Testing a match configuration involves selecting a simulated input record. So the simulated input record is what we are testing our match configuration against. And I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to select Joshua A. Abbott's as my input patient. And if I had known duplicates that the match configuration was not detecting, that is false negatives, I could go ahead and add them manually as targets to see why it is that they are not being flagged as matches. If I run my known false negative against a match configuration and it is identified as a match, it allows me to determine that the blocking is what's preventing that particular false negative from being detected. And I can update my blocking or scoring configurations accordingly. I'm just going to run this against the entire database. And what we can see is that I have now gotten 5 blocked records, and none of them were non-matches. They were all matches. I can see the individual records which have been detected, and I can modify my configuration accordingly. These sets of records look like they are actually quite good, but I can actually go in and see the details of what this match pair would look like on the match dashboard, just to verify that we have, in fact, 2 patients that are real matches. If I go back to my configuration details screen, I can see also how this match detection was performed. I can see that there were 532,000 patient records considered, of which 5 were matched or blocked based on their MRN value, and 5 were blocked based on their fuzzy characteristics. From there, all 5 records were put through each of my attributes, and except for address and SSN, which had no records coming through as matched, they were all matching on date of birth, gender concept, name, and telecom. And the output of this were that no records were deemed non-match, no records were deemed probable match, and 5 records were deemed a match. So there you have it, version 2.2 of SanteDB. More specifically, SanteDB with SanteMPI plugins enabled. We're doing a lot more work on the user interface, and also we're doing a complete refactoring of the persistence layer. You can find those on the feature new ADO branches in any of our projects. Currently, the performance refactor of the persistence layer is approximately 75% done. We have all our entities done. We're working on the ACT classes and then doing a full regression test. So we're looking to release that in the next few months, and that will be the basis of our next series of community technology previews, which will be the 2.3 stream. For now though, you can get the latest updates for version 2.2 either through the GitHub tags, or we have a maintenance branch on our projects called version/2.2, and that's where we're collecting all of our updates and bug fixes for this current version. Until then, we'll see you next time.